Today, as we continue on in our study, our Be Careful series, week 6, moving quickly. We'll be talking today about being careful how you run. And when someone uses the word run, different thoughts come to our minds. For me, one of the thoughts, first thing that comes to me is forest, right? Run, forest, run. Or sometimes I think of a casual or recreational run through the neighborhood, or maybe even a competitive race that we see sometimes with some of these Olympic runners. I do enjoy going and watching a lot of the track meets in the spring, so I always look forward to the spring. I don't see Robert Schock here this morning, but Robert and I try to catch a lot of track meets and watch these athletes in the area in the springtime. Sometimes we might even find ourselves in situations where we're running because we're afraid of something or scared of something. And anytime I see a picture of two guys running from a wild animal, I can't help myself. That old joke that comes up, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun your friend. Well, that's not my study this morning, and I'm not going to spend any time on that, but couldn't pass up the joke. But this morning we're going to be looking at this ideal of running, particularly competitive runners. We're not going to be looking necessarily at Olympic runners per se, but just people that run competitively or with a purpose, trying to get in shape, maybe stay in shape. But there are some characteristics that come when we start thinking about running that are beneficial to us in our Christian walk, our Christian run. And some of these traits, you have a lot of energy, the training that goes into it, the stamina you build, the consistent practice, the resilience it's building up, the strength, the confidence we have when we're in shape and running well, a high level of concentration. Nutrition's a factor. You got to feed yourself with the right food and nutrients. We do monitor progress. In fact, some people when they run are actually checking their watch as they run, trying to see if they're on pace or where they think they need to be running. It's a lot of discipline, a lot of determination, recovery. Your body's got to recover and rest and come back the next day. Got to be coachable. Tenacity, the stick-to-itiveness, accountable, goal setters. And no matter what you're doing in life, you look at these traits and you think about it and you say, those are traits I could use in my life. Anybody can use these in your life. And particularly if you're running your Christian walk or your Christian run as we're told to. Now, while preparing for this study, I ran across an interesting story. I'm always a sucker for good, fun things. Anybody here ever heard of someone named Lou Devine? Well, in January of 2016, in the city of Elkmont, Alabama, the city decided to hold a half a marathon race. And for those that know, a half a marathon is about 13.1 miles, so a pretty challenging distance. And this half marathon, the first time Elkmont had ever had such an event, was being sponsored as a fundraiser for the high school cross-country team. Now, what was unusual about this race is that an unregistered runner joined and ran the half marathon in 1 hour and 32 minutes and 56 seconds. For context, for those of you that are half marathoners, a half marathoner breaking 2 hours is generally a pretty common goal. That's a 9-minute, 9-second pace per hour. So a time of 1 hour and 32 minutes is actually quite good. In fact, in this particular case, it was good enough for a 7th place finish. Now, the reason this participant hadn't registered is because her owner didn't know she was planning to run. You see, Lou Devine was a 2.5-year-old bloodhound. And her owner had let her out that morning to do her business, and she heard all the commotion and happened to wander down to the starting line about the start of this race and decided to complete the race. So she ran alongside all these runners, went the entire 13 miles. Evidently, she wandered off course a couple of times to sniffed the surroundings, investigated a dead rabbit, but she always came back and finished with the runners. And true to their word, the race organizers awarded Ludivine her 7th place trophy. You can't help but love dogs, right? And thinking about old Ludivine brings a smile to my face because it does make us reflect on some important lessons in our own Christian run. However, there is one element where we're different from Ludivine. Ludivine's race and her success was by accident. Our Christian walk, our Christian run is not by accident. It takes a clear focus, a clear mind, understanding of the task at hand, a strong body, certain intentional choices, heavy doses of self-discipline and perseverance. And this morning I want to look at some of the traits found in successful runners that we too need to develop as part of our Christian walk, our Christian runs. And at a high level, some of these traits I want to look at this morning involved increasing our readiness. You know, you don't just decide to take off and run, right? I mean, there's certain things you have to do in preparation. You've got to find some clothing that you feel comfortable in, some socks, some shoes. You might even want to stretch and get loose, maybe do some mental preparation, identify a path you're going to follow. There's also a level of training and developing and growing that takes place. And that doesn't matter whether you're trying to train for something competitively or you're just running over the weekends. You don't just step out of the house and take off and run at your very best or your very fastest. You're growing, you're building your speed, your endurance, your techniques, your confidence. And along the way, we often need coaching. We also have to manage distractions. You know, even if you're just a casual runner or a weekend runner, there are distractions. You got injuries, you got weather, kids, sickness. A lot of things may come into play. But we also have an element of just clearing our minds of all the baggage in life and running our best race. And finally, when we've done all the things above, we can go forward and run with confidence. And you can say, what exactly does run with confidence mean? And one word picture I can give you of running with confidence is, as I mentioned, I like to go enjoy the high school track meets in the area come springtime. And if you ever go out and watch those races, generally as the racers line up, the PA announcer calls them by name and usually gives the school that they represent. And so they're doing a little bit of pre-run loosening up. But there's an aura of confidence you can see among those that really have a chance to win. There is an element of confidence that people that are well trained and ready to go exude. And so we're going to look at a few of these and dig into some of these actual categories and kind of talk about them in a little more detail this morning. And we're going to start with this ideal of readiness. But I should say this applies to not only whether you run competitively or just every day. But this ideal of readiness is we need to be ready to answer those who question our faith. As Peter writes to the Gentile Christians in Asia, he says, "But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for this hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." You know, I used to work for a large multinational corporation, and I had a VP that I worked for that was continually stressing to her managers to always have a 2 or 3 minute elevator speech in your back pocket. And you say, what's an elevator speech? Well, when we'd get to work, most of the people that worked were not working on the first floor, they were working on higher level floors. So you get to the elevator and get on the elevator to go to the floor in which you worked. And her position was, you never know who you're going to run into on the elevator. And just in case you happen to run into one of the senior executives, the ones that could really make some changes, she wanted us to be ready with what we were working on, what we were doing, what our purpose was. And you stop and think about that for a minute. And isn't that true in our Christian walk, right? You never know who you're going to run into. You never know who your readiness to share the gospel with may pay off and may help someone see Jesus. Another aspect of being ready is be ready for every good work. Paul in his letter to Titus says, remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatever is good. In Paul's letter to the Galatian Christians, he said, as we have opportunity, let us do good for all people, especially those who belong to the family of believers. And in his final discourse, Jesus shares an allegory about vine and branches that simply says, for us to bear much fruit. Are we ready to do good work? And a variation of this, but kicking it up a notch, is are we ready to teach those who will listen? When Paul writes to the saints in Rome, he feels obligated to establish some credentials before he speaks, and he's contrasting the Gospels to the law of Moses, and he makes one of these statements. I am obligated both to the Greeks and non-Greeks. Did I back it up? I went forward, didn't I? Oh, I see it. That's right. I am obligated both to the Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I am so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. And in Paul's second letter to Timothy, he says, preach the word, be prepared in season, out of season, correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. We do need to be able to reach out to those in physical need, but I'd say even more importantly, we need to be able to reach out to those with spiritual needs. And was Paul ready to share the gospel? Absolutely he was. And as I should note, it's not about preachers or elders sharing the gospel, it's about every one of us. We all have opportunities to do this. We don't have to be great speakers or orators. We just need to plant the seed, share the seed, inviting people to class, inviting people to our assemblies, hosting home Bible studies like Shan and Linda have been doing. Those are about being ready to teach those who will hear. Another aspect of readiness is we do need to be ready to endure hardships if they should come our way. James chapter 1 tells us, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. And when Paul was getting ready to return to Jerusalem, he knew he was going to encounter some imprisonment, some persecution. And there were those trying to get him to stop and not go. But his response to them was, why are you weeping and breaking my heart? I am ready not only to be bound, but also to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus. Paul knew he was going to have to endure hardships from time to time. And he endured some. We're fortunate, most of us that live in this country, we've never had to endure harsh circumstances for our faith. We might get teased, we might get made fun of, we might get shunned, but most of us have never experienced physical violence. Now, who knows if that's always going to be the case? But if it ever happens that we are persecuted for our beliefs, we need to be ready, we need to be prepared. And if it happens, we need to see it as Paul sees it, and that is as a blessing. A final thought on readiness is we do need to be ready and willing to attend to the needs of others. 1 Timothy chapter 6 says, command those who are rich in the present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. And in Hebrews 13:16, do not forget to do good, share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. In 1 John 3:17, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? You know, the scriptures are pretty clear. on God's expectation that we be willing to help those in need. But that's not what society tells us, right? Society is telling us you need more and more. Acquire more and more. Pursue more and more. I think our biggest challenge in our country today is maybe being satisfied with contentment. You know, I'm thankful that the Lord gave me a lot of opportunities in my life to travel in my work to various places around the world, and many of the places I have spent a fair amount of time truly are third world countries. And if you've ever been in a third world country, it's something you don't forget. I don't think a lot of us as Americans really appreciate what some people in the world are dealing with. And you know, many of you are also good friends with Joe Barnett. Joe, in his daily devotional, I know that's kind of hard to read, so I'll read it to you just a minute. But he shares a daily devotional through this pathway evangelism. And in talking a little bit about this, he says in one of his devotionals, our little world is not just about us. It's also about those close to us, folks who are fighting their private wars, their secret hunger, their inner poverty. Mother Teresa said, the spiritual poverty of the West is greater than ours. You in the West have millions of people who suffer such terrible loneliness and emptiness. These are not hungry in the physical sense, but they are in another way. They know the need. They know they need something more than money, but they don't know what it is. When Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, he wasn't talking out a cliche to slap on the refrigerator door. He was telling us to feel the hurts of those who live shoulder to shoulder with us, those who live with, work with, worship with. Jesus asked Peter if he loved him, and Peter said he did. Then feed my sheep. Take care of my lambs, Jesus said. And if we love Jesus, truly love Jesus, that's what we're going to do. Feed each other, take care of each other, because that's what love of him does. Anything you did for even the least of my people, you have done for me, he said. And if you want the full context of the discussion between Jesus and Peter, it's found in John chapter 21. But I just want to hone in on this last point just a second. Look around. We have people, even in this class today, that are hurting. You wouldn't know it just by looking at them, because they all look like things are fine. And so sometimes we have to dig a little deeper than that. Look into the eyes of people, and you will see the hurts they're going through. You know, I want to talk next week. It's going to be careful what you sow. And one of the topics we're going to talk a little bit about at that time is when you ask people how they're doing, you may not always get a true response. You may hear fine, you may hear good, but that's really not what's going on. Sometimes there is hurt, and we don't know it, and you have to look into people's eyes. We have to get to the point where we can hear things that people aren't saying. And I know that's hard, but it's true. We've got to be able to hear what people aren't saying. Can we fix everyone's hurts? No, we can't. But at a minimum, we can pray for their hurts, because there's someone who can help them with more power than what we can imagine. I do remember back in our last preacher search, and people would often ask me, what can I do to help you in your preacher search? And I said, well, you can take an hour and you can listen to some preachers. You can go watch some preachers. But if you really want to help us, go spend an hour in prayer and pray for our preacher search. Right? There's certain things that men can do. But the biggest thing men can do is just pray to God and unleash all the power that God has to bear. He can make it happen. We're not limited. God is. So before I get off this, I'm going to make a little bit of a marketing pitch for Joe. If you're not subscribed to his Pathway Evangelism site, you ought to go find on your browser when you get home, look up Pathway Evangelism, Joe Barnett, and just sign up. His daily devotionals are free. If you want to pitch in and help his site, you can make donations, but they're not required. But Joe is a long-time gospel preacher. He's been doing this a long time, and he's very, very effective at it. But he's also just a good guy. He's a wonderful, wonderful brother. And you might look. Sometimes he actually comes and visits with us here at Woodland Oak, so he could be here. You never know. He doesn't live in this area. He lives, I think, over towards Cypress and the Champions area, but he's here sometimes. So if you see him, tell him hello and how much you appreciate what he's doing. All right, back to our lesson. As part of being ready to run, we've got to continually train, develop, and grow. I mean, when we're out running and trying to develop running, we have to do this too, right? But to grow spiritually in truth and spirit, we have to keep training our minds, our thoughts, our hearts. But just like when we go out and run a lot, if you go out and get in the best shape you've ever been in, and then you decide not to work out for 3 or 4 months, what happens? You lose your edge, right? You lose your training. You lose your stamina. You lose your conditioning. And the same thing can happen in our Christian walks. If we're not studying and growing and developing every day, we're going to lose our spiritual edge. So we've got to keep training. In writing 1 Timothy, Paul gives some personal instruction and advice, warning about false teachers, but also instructing Timothy not to be, people are going to look down on him because of his age, and he's encouraging him. He said, take pains with these things, be absorbed in them, so that your progress will be evident to all. And Peter offers some similar encouragement in his second letter to Christians in Asia when he says, but grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. To him be the glory, both now and to the day of eternity. Keep training, keep growing, keep developing. And sometimes we just have to push ourselves, right? I mean, if you're out running, trying to physically get in shape, that alarm goes off. It's hard to get up and push yourself out the door to go run, but you got to keep pushing yourself. And that's going to be true in your reading in your scriptures, in your prayer life. Sometimes you're going to have to push yourself to do those things, but keep doing it. And I'd also say sometimes when you're around competitive runners, what do they do to build their training? Well, they find them training partners. Well, what's a training partner? Well, training partners are people that are run alongside them, and sometimes the training partners are faster, and they push them to get better, push them to keep going further and harder. That's the good thing about the church, right? We all come together. We're here this morning. You're around people that hopefully will push you and develop and grow. Keep sharpening. Iron sharpens iron, as we're told in Proverbs 27. That's what happens when we're around good influences. Now, another aspect of this training, developing, and growing is trusting the coaching and knowing expectations. Hebrews 12:2 says, fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorned its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. John 14:6, Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. In the first letter to the Gentile Christians, Peter writes about suffering and gives an exhortation on steadfastness, and he says, to this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow his steps. Who's our coach here? Our coach is Jesus, so to speak. He's teaching us, he's encouraging us, he's laid out a training plan for us, he's pushing us to move forward. You know, those of you that have participated in athletics know that some of the very best coaches are coaches that have been there and done that. They know what you're going through. They know what you're sacrificing. They know the ins and outs of everything you need to know. Jesus knows that. He's been through it all. He's suffered for us. He knows what life is about. Just follow him. You know, I think I mentioned this to you before, that when I was growing up, my dad was a high school coach. And I remember used to sit around and hear my dad talk to the other high school coaches. And they would use this term, coachable. And the ideal of being coachable, what is someone that's coachable? Well, someone who's not coachable is someone who doesn't want to listen to instruction. They don't want to do what the coach tells them to do. They want to do it their way. It's all about them. Someone that's coachable, on the other hand, is someone who listens to instructions, listening to coaching, paying attention, doing what the coach instructs us to do. Most of us in this room here are Christians. We need to be coachable. We need to listen. And as for knowing expectations, it's generally a good idea to know what's ahead. If someone came along and said, hey, come on, let's go run a race, well, your questions are going to be, are we talking about a sprint? Are we talking about a marathon? Are we talking about hurdles? What are we talking about? I'd like to know the expectations. How about cross-country runners? Cross-country runners sometimes run through makeshift tracks. You know, they've got barricades and signs and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you don't know ahead of time where things are going to take you, it could be a little confusing to you, and you may waste some time and effort and energy. You need to know the expectations. In our spiritual walk, the expectations are set for us. We just have to read them, pay attention to them, and do what they say. And sometimes along this path of training, developing, and growing, we encounter some distractions and hindrances, right? The Hebrew writer tells us in Hebrews 12:1, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. You know, sometimes when you're training to run a race, it's not unusual to put resistance in your training plan. You might be pulling some weights. Some people get these parachute-looking things and attach it to you and run and use the wind and the parachute as resistance. Some use resistance bands. Some use weights. But when it's time to actually run the race, what do you do with all that stuff? You take it off and put it down because it's going to slow you down. And that's what life is like when we're trying to run through life with all this baggage. We need to discard it. Another hindrance is simply getting caught up in all the distractions and worries of this life. Matthew 13:22 tells us, the seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. Man, I like that phrase, the deceitfulness of wealth. Timothy 6 tells us, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and into trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destructions. Are there destructions in life? Absolutely. And maybe the biggest one of all is this one that I've got here, this pursuit of more and more. That's why I really like this phrase, the deceitfulness of wealth. We need to pay attention to that and not let that get a chokehold on us. What about fear? Is fear a distraction? Yeah, sometimes fear just keeps us from doing even the first step, taking that first step. Have you ever known someone that was so paralyzed they were just unwilling to take that first step? Just couldn't do it. You know, you think back to David and Goliath, all the men that Saul had, all the fighting men, none of them wanted to go out and engage Goliath, right? And here comes this young boy, and you just kind of picture it, just bebopping along. He knew that God had helped him overcome a bear and a lion. He didn't view Goliath any different than that. What made Goliath any different? And you know, I put this little clip up here, and I realize the quote is a bit colorful, but David was doing a little smack talking. What was he going to do, right? He just had a lot of confidence. For the Spirit of God does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. And you know, this ideal of fear paralyzing, it happens in the church too. One of the things I really enjoy about here at Woodland Oaks is we do have men that are working with our young boys. And I say young boys, these are boys that are junior high, high school, some of them are younger than that. And we give them an opportunity on Wednesday nights to sometimes lead singing or give a devotional talk or lead prayers. And why that is so important is it's giving these young men an opportunity to get in front of the congregation and do things and help overcome some of that early fear. And I know if you don't do that when you're young and you get to be where you're a little bit older, getting up in front of people and talking is terrifying. It absolutely is terrifying. It may stop you from even attempting to do it. So thank you to the guys. I know Frank helps. I appreciate all they're doing with these young guys to encourage them, encourage those young guys. But also know there could be some men sitting in here today that are paralyzed with that and afraid to get up and speak. And I'll confide to you, this is not my comfort zone. I am not a public speaker by design. I have to work at it. And I find myself, as long as I'm doing it routinely, I'm good. But if I ever don't do it for a few months and I have to get asked to come back and do it, it's hard. It's hard. So I'm sharing with you, if anybody in here finds that a challenge, come and see me. I mean, I know where you are. I'll be glad to help and certainly pray for you and try to help you however I can. But we can't be afraid. When Jesus reached out his hand to Peter when he was on the water, and Peter said, "Can I walk on the water?" He said, "Sure, come on." Everything was good until what? He started paying attention to the wind and the waves, and all of a sudden he realized this is not natural. I can't be doing this, and he began to sink. And I think we just have to keep ourselves in mind for ourselves that when we're asked to do something for God's cause, please him. Don't worry about pleasing men and those around them. Don't listen to their voices. Listen to God. If you can do it. Another hindrance that distracts is this idea of looking backwards. Have you ever tried running and not looking ahead, looking backwards? It's hard. You don't run near as fast, but you've also got all these obstacles in front of you that you may trip on and fall. Clouds your focus, it's a distraction. Jesus said, remember Lot's wife, what happened to her? No one who puts his hand on the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. I grew up in West Texas, which meant we had to do some work on cotton farms growing up. And if you've ever driven a plow and you get to the end of the row and look behind you, if you weren't paying attention, it's pretty obvious you weren't paying attention. I mean, you see it really easily. God is telling us you can't look behind you. Look forward, keep fixed on him. And finally, I've noted up here the words of a man who gave it all to follow Christ. And he says, brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. In short, you can't run your best if you're looking behind. You've got to look forward. Any coach will tell you when you're running a race, don't pay attention to who's on your right or who's on your left. Just focus on the finish and go that direction. And that's what God is telling us to do. Stay fixed on him and his eternal purposes to navigate all these challenges and his hindrances in life. And I say all of that, and I've got another one of these word pictures, visuals I want to share with you. But like I said, I love athletics. I love Olympics. I kind of discounted the 2020 Olympics because it was COVID. So going back to 2016, those of you that may have paid attention, I don't know if you remember, but in the swimming event, there was an American swimmer by the name of Michael Phelps. Phenomenal swimmer. And he's the one sitting in the background here in this blue jacket, hoodie. And most of you probably already know this, but in the Olympics, when it's Before it's your time to race, they gather all the athletes that are about to compete and they put them in a holding room. And then when their race is ready to run, they march them all out in order. They've got them all lined up and they're ready to go. And so while they're in this holding room getting ready to race, Phelps had lost to this guy standing up in the gold and the green jacket. This is Chad Leclos. He was a rival swimmer from South Africa. He had beaten Phelps 4 years earlier in the prior Olympics. And in the holding room, he's doing his very best to distract Michael Phelps from his race. But Phelps was locked on. He was looking forward to what his goal was, why he was there. And during the swim, somebody snapped this picture of the two racing side by side. Where's Phelps looking? Straight ahead. He's locked on the finish line. Where's the other guy looking? He's looking at Phelps. And somebody put this in a caption and shared it, and it said, winners focus on winning, losers focus on winners. And that's right. That applies in our Christian race, right? You can't focus on other people. Focus on God or we're going to be distracted. And then when you've done all these things we've laid out here, when you're ready, when you've trained, you've developed, you're prepared, you can run forward with confidence. In 2 Timothy 1, verses 11 and 12, we read, and of this gospel I was appointed a herald and an apostle and a teacher. That is why I am suffering as I am. Yet this is no cause for shame, because I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard what I've entrusted to him until that day. It's another picture from the 2016 Olympics. This is the sprinter Usain Bolt, and I don't know if you can see it real clearly. Phenomenal sprinter, but he's always smiling. I guess the fact that he always wins, he always smiles. But he's always smiling. And the only time you don't see him smiling was when he's in the starting blocks, ready to go, and during the race. But a lot of times when he gets toward the end of the race, he'll start smiling again. This is kind of how I see Paul, going through all he's been going through, still smiling, with the same level of confidence. And what about this visual that Paul gives us? 1 Corinthians 9, 25 and 26. For everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last. We do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I don't run like someone running aimlessly. I don't fight like a boxer beating the air. Paul knows that the race that he was preparing for had eternal implications. Important race. Not an earthly race for a prize. But he's running because God has laid out a plan for him. And that's what he's doing. And in the second verse that I've got here, 2 Timothy, there's a strong sense of urgency in Paul's words here, and words that I think we need to listen to today. I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but all who have longed for his appearing. That sounds to me like someone running with confidence. So let's quickly summarize. To make the most of your Christian run, stay ready. Be ready to answer those who question our faith. Be ready to do good work. Be ready to teach those who will listen. Be ready to endure hardships should they come. And pay attention. Sometimes listen to what's not being said and help those who have needs. Train and develop. Keep training. Keep growing. Train those hearts and minds. Know the rules. Know the expectations. Push yourself to grow your conditioning and your stamina. And follow and trust our coaching. It's the best coaching you could get. And when you've done these things, when you're ready, you're training, keep fighting those hindrances, those distractions. Let go of the baggage. We talked about that a little bit last week. That's like running uphill with this big rock you're pushing up there. Stay focused on your spiritual priorities. Don't be afraid. And keep locked on to to God's eternal purpose. Don't be looking behind. And when you've done all these things, you can run your spiritual life, you can run your spiritual walk with confidence. That's what we're told to do. The prize that awaits, I can't even begin to describe it for you. Our coach is waiting for us at this finish line. You may have some friends and family members that have gone on before you that are cheering you on. We've got a lot to run for. And we've got a path, and we know the training. We just need to take care of it. Any comments, folks, before we close out? I hear them starting to shuffle. The refreshments await. Any comments? Yeah, I agree with you. That's probably a point I could have made, but that's part of this ideal of staying focused on your lane. You don't have to watch the people on the left and right of you. You just need to stay focused and keep moving. And there's something really good about some of the race events I've seen where somebody trips and falls, and here comes somebody along to picks them up, helps them get started again. Really beautiful stuff. So thank you for that comment.